Hi everyone, it's Hannah from Hand Done Crochet, and today we are making this fabulous granny stitch top down hoodie together. Now you'll find information in the description below about where you can find the written pattern, and you'll also find information about the other patterns that go along with this in the Franny Granny collection that I have. I have a hoodie, a sweater and a cardigan all in this kind of style with lots of different options for sleeves and cuffs, etc. And I also have adult versions with squares that go around the yoke for the cardigan and the hoodie and a poncho, and then I have child sizes as well. So I'll put all the information of all of those things in the description, and then you'll be able to go and find the written pattern for the size that you would like to make, and then we can get going together. To make the hoodie, I have chosen to use comfy worsted weight yarn, which is from We Crochet. It's a really lovely yarn to work with and comes in the most lovely colours. All the details of how much you'll need for each size is also detailed in the description and obviously in the pattern too. You're also going to need a 4.5mm or G+ crochet hook, or the hook size that meets the gauge for you. Then we'll need a pair of scissors, some stitch markers and a needle for your ends. Now let me just quickly talk you through the construction of the hoodie. We actually begin at this point here where we have a foundation chain that then starts us working down from the neckline. We begin in rows because we then want to join into rounds, but we then get this nice V shape that sits on our neckline here. So once we then start joining and working in rounds, we get to the point of the yoke, which is this top section here, where we need to split for the sleeves. So once we have enough stitches that we have 2 sleeves and the body's worth in, we then split under here and then just work the body section. We carry on working down, and that then dictates how long our hoodie will be. You can carry on working for as long as you like. And the thing about this means then that we have a triangle shape in the side. This will all become clear, I promise. A triangle shape in the side that we then have to fill in. So we do each of those sides separately once we've got it to the length we want it to be. Then you can add the optional sleeves if you'd like to, and they can be any length that you want them to be. And then of course we can put the hood on. Now I am also working on a dress version of this without the hood. So if you like this neckline shape but don't want the hood, you don't have to add the hood, because we just basically join to add the hood on from our foundation chain at the beginning, but you don't have to add that if you don't want to. So all of this is described in the written pattern as well as here in this tutorial. So go and find all the resources you need, get your yarn, and let's get going. To begin our yoke, we are going to need to put a slip knot on the hook, and then the pattern, the written pattern, will tell you for different sizes the amount of foundation chains that we need. But for the size that I'm making, the medium, we're going to make 96 chains. Once you've got the number of chains that you need for the size you're making, we are going to work back along that chain, and in the second chain from the hook, we're going to be working a stacked double crochet. Now these are a brilliant way of getting nice crisp clean edges to the ends of your rows in crochet, and they are really simple to do. We just work a single crochet into that second chain from the hook, and then into the sidebar of that single crochet, this one here, we are going to work another single crochet. And what that does, it just sits 2 single crochet on top of each other and reaches the height of a double crochet, which is the stitch that we need to use for this pattern. Then when you've done that, we're going to work a double crochet in the next 2 chains that we have. So there's 1 and then there's 2. Then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip the next chain, and then we're going to work a double crochet in the next 3 chains that we have. So skip that one and then work into 1, 2 and 3. And that's all we now need to repeat along this row. We're going to chain 1 and then skip 1 and then work in the next 3. So we chain 1, we skip 1, and then we work a double crochet into the next 3 chains. So now go ahead and repeat that all the way across your foundation chain, and then I'll meet you back and I'll show you what we do for row 2. Right, once we've completed that row, we are ready to turn. So to begin our next row, we are going to need to make a granny cluster, which is one of these sets of 3 double crochet into this first stitch. So we begin with working a stacked double crochet, and in the written pattern you'll see then from then on we just call that a double crochet at the beginning of a row. And then we also put another 2 double crochet all into that first stitch that we have there. Then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip the next 2 double crochet of that granny cluster, and then into this chain 1 space here we're going to work a granny cluster. So 3 double crochet go into that chain 1 space, and then we chain 1. And for different sizes there'll be a different number to work, obviously because our foundation chain was a different length, but for the size I'm making I need to do that 11 times now. So into the next chain 1 space goes 3 double crochet, and then a chain 1, and we skip the granny cluster underneath it, these 3 double crochet. So do that for the amount of times that you need to for the size you're making, and then we will create the point that goes at the back. Now I've done the 11 that I need for the size I'm making. Into this next chain 1 space we are going to create a point that's going to be at the back, and so to do that we're going to work 2 granny clusters in here. So we begin with 3 double crochet, and that makes our first granny cluster, and then we chain 2, and then into the chain 1 space we work another 3 double crochet. So that then becomes 2 granny clusters there into that 1 space, and then we're going to chain 1, and then we're back to our regular granny clusters here that we did. Into the chain 1 space we work 3 double crochet, and then we chain 1, etc., etc. And we carry this on all the way until the last chain 1 space here. So meet me back and then I'll show you just what we do at the end of the row. Okay, so I've worked into that last chain 1 space, I've worked a chain 1, and now what we need to do is skip the next 2 double crochet of this last granny cluster, and then into the last stitch of the row we're going to work 3 double crochet. So we'll add a granny cluster here. So we do 1 at the beginning, 1 at the end, and then we have that special one right in the center at the back that adds 2 granny clusters. And so that's the end of row 2. I've turned to work row 3, but the important thing right now is to go and check in the written pattern for the size you're making, because row 3 onwards is different for each of the sizes. Some of the sizes will need shoulder increases, as we've called them, and I'll show you how to do those, but the size that I'm making, this medium, doesn't need any shoulder increases. So you may or may not need them depending on the size that you're making. But the start of the row begins exactly the same for whichever size you're making. It's the same as we've just done here. We're going to work a stacked double crochet into that first stitch, and then joining it will be 2 double crochet as well. So that gets a granny cluster there. Then we're going to chain 1, we'll skip the last part of this granny cluster, so these 2 double crochet here, and then into the chain 1 space we're going to work a granny cluster. Then we'll chain 1, and then we continue. So granny clusters in these chain 1 spaces up until we get to the chain 2 space that we have at the back. So work away along here until we get to that chain 2 space. The only difference is if you have a shoulder increase at any point in your yoke, and that means that we need to add another granny cluster into the mix here. So that any shoulder increase will always happen at the midpoint between the beginning and the chain 2 space, and then also on the other side between the chain 2 space and the end. So it will be the chain 1 space right in the center, and that will vary obviously depending on which size you're making and on which row that you are on. So I'm just going to do an example here. Let's imagine this, bear with me, imagine that this chain 1 space is the chain 1 that the pattern tells you need to work your shoulder increase on. And in order to do that, we are going to work 2 double crochet, then you're going to chain 1, then you're going to work another 2 double crochet all into that chain 1 space where it tells you you need to put the shoulder increase. Then you chain 1 and then you continue as normal. You're going to be working 3 double crochet, so putting a regular granny cluster into the next chain 1 space and subsequent ones. So that is how we work the shoulder increase into a chain 1 space. And what that now means is that these 2 double crochet here are now a granny cluster, and these 2 double crochet are also a granny cluster. And what we have is an extra chain 1 space then for the next row to put a granny cluster into. So that's all there is to the shoulder increases, but I say really watch out for whichever size you're making as to where they happen in the pattern. So now you need to continue to follow the pattern with or without the shoulder increases as you need them for your size up until you've completed row 6. And then at the end of row 6, we break our yarn and we start to join and work in round instead of rows, which will give us the shape of the body of the hoodie. So if you go up until row 6 for the size you're making, then meet me back here and we'll start from round 7 onwards together. Right, so now we have got to the end of that row of row 6, and what we now need to do is start working in rounds. And in order to do that, we are going to chain 2. And then once we've done that chain 2, we're going to slip stitch into this first stitch of that row to join. Now, if you would like the space, this little V of your top, to be deeper, then you can just do that on whichever row that you like. You can carry on following the pattern and then slip stitch here when you're ready to join into rounds. Or similarly, if you would like it to happen before then you just join on whichever row it is that you want to then start working in rounds. Or the other option is, if you would like to make a cardigan version, is that you don't do this at all. You just continue working in these back and forth rows. So there are lots of options there, and you can decide which one works best for you. But what we're going to do once you have joined, you're then going to break your yarn, because this now becomes the front, and it's just slightly neater and nicer if we have the joins, if we're changing colours and slip stitches and all of that jazz, if that's at the back of the work. So this now becomes the front of our yoke here, and this is going to be the back. And so when you're ready to start working in rounds, we're going to have turned our work, and then you're going to join into this chain 2 space here, whether you're changing colour or whether you're using the same colour. Break your yarn and then join at this point of the yoke. Now that we're going to work in rounds, it's very similar, but into this chain 2 space we're going to work as we did before. We're going to work that stacked double crochet and then 2 double crochet to make our first granny cluster. So we're going to carry on making a point here, then we're going to chain 2, then we're going to work a granny cluster into that chain 2 again. So we've got those 2 granny clusters all into that point there. And then you're going to chain 1, and then you're going to work, for the size that you're making, the right amount of granny clusters with or without the shoulder increases as you need them, all the way until we get to where this new chain 2 is here at the front. So go ahead and work those, and then I'll show you how we work this point here. So when we reach this chain 2 that we joined here with, we are going to work one of our points in this place here. So we're going to work 3 double crochet to make our first granny cluster. Then we're going to chain 2, and then we're going to work another 3 double crochet, all in that chain 2 that we used to join the 2 sides together. Then you're ready to chain 1, and then carry on working in these chain 1 spaces and work however many shoulder increases or granny clusters that you need to, all the way around until you get back to the first stitch of your current round. So when you get back to that first stitch, we are going to slip stitch in that first one to join. And then if you're going to continue with this same colour yarn, what we're going to need to do is slip stitch our way into that chain 2 space, because that's where we'll need to begin the next round. And then we turn and you're ready to work the next round. If you're going to change colours here though, you just need to break your yarn where we joined with the slip stitch on the round before, and then you need to turn and join your new colour to this chain 2 space here. Our subsequent rounds for all of the yokes are worked as a combination of granny clusters of the 3 double crochet or shoulder increases, plus then each of them gets a point at the front and a point at the back. So we continue to increase the size of our yoke until it's the size it needs to be before we split for the sleeves. So if you continue as per the written pattern, for my medium size I need to do up to round 22, and then meet me back here and I'll show you how we split for the sleeves and create just the body section and leave armholes. Once we have worked all the rounds for the yoke, for whatever size you're making, we now are ready to split for the sleeves. And what that means is that we are going to be placing stitch markers at various points. So we need 4 stitch markers to put them at 4 points around the yoke that we've made, that will then portion off, and it will mean that we have X amount of spaces ready for the sleeve hole on either side. So in the written pattern, you will find, whether you're accessing on the blog or on the PDF, you will find all of the numbers written. But if you have the PDF, there are also diagrams that can help with this step as well, because I will be showing you here for the medium that I'm making, but they are different numbers for different sizes. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start counting from this back point here. You can start counting from either of your chain 2 spaces, but I'm going to start counting from here. And the pattern tells me that I need to skip 11 chain 1 spaces from this chain 2 space. So I've got 1, 2, 3, sorry if I've fallen off the end there, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. And then I need to put a stitch marker in the next chain 1 space along. Then I need to skip the next 8 chain 1 spaces. So I'm going to get my stitch marker, oh I can't pick it up, stitch marker ready here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I put a stitch marker in the next chain 1 space. And then we start to count from the next chain 2 space that we have, so whichever one you haven't started counting from, and you repeat the process. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and put a stitch marker in the next chain 1 space, and then from there I count 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, and then put a stitch marker in the next chain 1 space. So once you've got your stitch markers in place, just check that you've got the symmetrical amount of chain 1 spaces available, because then that will make your body go wonky and your arms go wonky if they're not right at this point. Then when you're happy that they are right, we need to get back to where we were and turn, ready to work our next round. And what our next round will do is add some underarm chains from where these stitch markers are, in order to create our armholes to be the right size. So we work in exactly the same way as we have before. We're going to work our point to begin with, so our stacked double crochet, and then our 2 double crochet that create our first granny cluster, then a chain 2, and then a granny cluster in the same chain 2 space, because what this is doing is still adding length to the hoodie for us. Then we chain 1, and then we go for it just as we have been, with working a granny cluster in each chain 1 space and working a chain 1, and you carry on doing that until you get to where your first stitch marker is. So this stitch marker is going to get a granny cluster in there. So meet me back when you're at that point and I'll show you what we do next. Here I am at that first stitch marker, and I've done a granny cluster in there. And what we'll now need to do is check in the pattern how many chains you'll need to do for the size you're making. For my size here, the medium size, I'm going to chain 8. And then once you've got the right amount of chains for your size, we need to find the next chain 1 space that has a stitch marker in it. And in that chain 1 space, we are going to work a granny cluster. So 1, 2, 3 double crochet into there. And what that has done has then created us a space that our sleeve will go in, our arm as our armhole here. And then all we need to do is carry on, chain 1, and then work our granny clusters all the way down to where our chain 2 is, our point, and you're going to do exactly the same as you would normally in that chain 2 space there. Granny clusters all the way to that, then work our point, and then we travel with our granny clusters to the next stitch marker and we repeat what we've just done. So we'll work a granny cluster in there, then chain 8 or however many you need for your size. Then you find your final stitch marker and you work a granny cluster in there, and that creates your second armhole. And then we carry on working, and then we slip stitch in our first to join. So go ahead and work that round and then meet me back and I'll show you what we do for the next one. So the end of that round, I've slip stitched my way to my chain 2 space and turned, just as we have for every other round. And what we're going to do now is work exactly as we have before with our point here at the beginning and then granny clusters up until we get to our chain under the arm. Now again, I will say again, this is a different number for different sizes, but the principle is the same as to what we do to work into them. So we'll begin here in our chain 2 space by working our point of 2 granny clusters separated by a chain 2. So that is our point there. Then we chain 1 and then off we go with our granny clusters into our chain 1 spaces all the way along up until you reach the underarm chain. And when you reach that underarm chain, you need to make sure that you check back in the pattern for the size that you're making to see exactly where we place the stitches along here. But lots of them do use a chain 8. So if you have a chain 8, this is what it will look like. We're going to work a granny cluster into the first of the 8 chains. So we have 1, 2 and 3 double crochet all into that same one. And then we're going to skip the next 2 chains, and then over the next 2 we're going to work a double crochet 2 together. So we begin a double crochet but don't finish it in that first one, and then we begin another one in the second chain that we have from there, and we yarn over and we complete them together, and then we skip the next 2, and then in the last chain of those 8 we're going to work 3 double crochet and put a granny cluster in there. Now as I say, if you've got a longer chain you'll have more granny clusters, if you have less you'll have less but the principle is the same, and that's what our underarm will then look like. So then we chain 1 and off we go again. We're going to work into the chain 1 spaces. And to carry on this round, it's exactly the same principle. We carry on with our granny clusters up until we get to the chain 2 space, and then we work our points, and then you carry on the other side until you get to your underarm chain, and whatever you did in the first underarm chain you repeat on this underarm chain, and then carry on until you get back to your very first stitch. You slip stitch to join, get through to that chain 2 space, or if you're changing colour, break your yarn and then turn and rejoin your new yarn in that chain 2 space, and then meet me back and I'll just show you the principles of the next round. Once you've done the next round, that's all you need to know for adding as much or as little length as you would like to your hoodie. Once that round is complete, you need to get to that chain 2 space, as I said, and turn. Now I'm just going to show you with the stitch marker the chain 1 space that we're aiming for. We have our double crochet 2 together here in the center, and then we're working to this second chain 1 space before it. So I'm going to put my stitch marker in there, because what we're going to do now is we're going to start decreasing here in the center, and we're going to start pulling in underneath the arm. So if you work away, create your point there and then work your granny clusters up until we get to where this stitch marker is, put 3 double crochet in there, and then I'll show you what we do next. So there's that chain 1 space that I've worked a granny cluster in, and then I'm going to work a granny cluster into the next chain 1 space, so that's the last one before the double crochet 2 together. and then rather than chaining one, I'm going to skip the granny cluster that we have here, and then directly into the double crochet 2 together, I'm going to work a double crochet. And then after that, I'm going to skip the granny cluster here and then go straight into the chain 1 space that we have there with our next granny cluster. Then we're back to how we always are with a chain 1 and then go for it in the next chain 1 space. And that carries on all the way around. The only difference to how we have been working is what we do here underneath the arm. So your point here at the end in your chain 2 space is the same, but then when you get round to the other underarm, which has disappeared from me, where's it gone? But then when you get round to your other underarm, you do the same, and we're going to work a double crochet in this double crochet 2 together. And then subsequent rounds, this is the round that sets you up. Basically, you can repeat this as many times as you like to get the length that you want your hoodie to be. And the only difference is that you will then on subsequent rounds have a double crochet to work into as opposed to a double crochet 2 together. So keep going with this round until you have your hoodie the length that you would like it to be. Now the great thing is you can obviously try it on now because you've made your splits for your sleeves and you can see where it will sit on you. And don't worry about the fact that it looks a very odd shape. We will sort that shortly. But what we want to do is these points are going to set the length of your hoodie. Just be mindful that if you're going to add a rib at the bottom, it will add some extra length, but get these points to the length that you would like them to be, and then meet me back here and I will show you how we start to flatten the sides and actually fill in these triangles that we have here. Once you've worked as many rounds as you would like to get your hoodie to the length it needs to be, we now need to close off these corners and flatten the bottom of it. And the way that we do that is just one small tweak to what we've been doing. We now stop increasing here, we stop, if I can get hold of it, we stop making a point here and instead we need to go flat across in this direction. The way we do that then is rather than making a point here in the chain 2, we are going to just work a stacked double crochet, and that is all that we need to do in that chain 2 space there at the beginning, and that becomes the flat part. And then we go straight for the first chain 1 and we work a granny cluster in it. And then we chain 1 and we work this bit in exactly the same way. We work our double crochet here in the center, we carry on with our granny clusters, and then when we get to this last chain 1 space before the chain 2 here, we're going to put a granny cluster in there, then we're not going to chain 1 and we're going to double crochet into this other chain 2 space, because what we're now going to be doing is working back and forth in rows on this half of the hoodie. And then when we've closed this whole side, because we'll be decreasing each time we do that, we then will go and repeat the process on the other side. So if I turn this is the front that we have. These are our armholes, and then we need to work a triangle here and a triangle here on this side. So we do them separately. So work away for this row until you get to this chain 2 space at the back. And then we'll work this together and I'll show you how we turn, and then you'll have everything you need to know to close both of the sides. So there I have a granny cluster in that last chain 1 space before the chain 2, and we're not going to chain 1, we're going to just work a double crochet into that chain 2 space, and then we just need to turn because we're going to go back along that row that we have just created, and we're going to begin with a stacked double crochet in the first stitch. Then we are going to skip this granny cluster and then go straight for that chain 1 space and work a granny cluster in it. And so this row and all the subsequent rows are then the same, working a stacked double crochet at the beginning and at the ends. So when you get to the end there, you're going to be putting a stacked double crochet into that last stitch, and we'll decrease in the middle. So I call it a decrease, but it's not really. You just work this double crochet in the center and that will pull in at the middle, and that will create the triangle for you. And you just need to keep repeating that row until you get to the point where you have 4 granny clusters. So I couldn't think of the word there. 4 granny clusters, so 2 either side, and then you will have 1 a double crochet here at the beginning, a double crochet in the center, and a double crochet at the end. So keep going until you get to that point, and then I'll show you the last couple of rows just to completely close the side of the hoodie. Right then, here we are. I have got my 1, 2, 3, 4 granny clusters and 1, 2 and 3 double crochet stitches. And this next row we are going to do really similarly a stacked double crochet at the very beginning there, and then into the first chain 1 space we do a granny cluster, and then we're already at the center here, so we don't do a chain 1, we just go straight into that double crochet with a double crochet just as we've been doing, and then we go for the chain 1 space and work our granny cluster in there. And then here we are at the end, and we're going to work our double crochet in that last stitch. So that's all there is to that row. Then the final row we turn, and we don't have any granny clusters to work here. We are just going to work a stacked double crochet in that first one, and then we skip this granny cluster to work a double crochet in the double crochet, and then we skip this granny cluster and we work a double crochet in the very last stitch. And that has completed that side and closed it. So if we lay this flat now, we can see that this has given us a nice level bottom. And now we need to close off and work this other side of it now. And to find out where we begin, we need to make sure that we join our yarn to the chain 2 space with the stitches facing the wrong side of the stitches facing us. So we will have turned, we're pretending that we're carrying on, we've turned our work. So we now need to join our yarn to this chain 2 space and work the triangle and close the sides in exactly the same way as we did on the other side. So chain in there to get going, then we work our stacked double crochet there, and then we go straight for this chain 1 space that we have, working a granny cluster into there. And what you'll find is you'll come to the chain 2 space at the other side of the hoodie that has then already got, where is it? It's hard to find. It's already got a flat side into it. So you're going to work all the way to here, and then you will turn and you will repeat the process, carrying on decreasing until you don't have any stitches left, and that will level off the whole of the bottom for you. And once you've done that, come back to me and we'll talk about options for edgings and ribbings, and also for if you'd like to put some sleeves on. Now I wanted to walk you through a few options for the bottom band for the hoodie. Now that we've closed our sides and so on, we can either leave it exactly how it is, and that looks lovely because we have a nice straight edge, or we can add a really simple join as you go ribbing, which I'll show you. Or you can add just an even simpler yarn over slip stitch round or 2, depending on how you would like it to be, which is what I think I will do for this version, because then it will match the hood edging that I'm going to do. So if you wanted to do the join as you go more traditional looking ribbon, we are going to join at one of these double crochets that we have at the side here. And then you are going to chain as many as you would like for the depth of your ribbing. So say we do 5 there. And then what we need to do is work back along this chain into the back bumps. We're going to work a single crochet in each of those. And then we need to slip stitch into the side of the next stitch around, and then we turn just these few stitches here of our rib, and then we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of each of these stitches. So we yarn over, pop it into the place you need to be, yarn over, and then pull through everything. That didn't work well, did it? So we yarn over, we go into the back loop, we yarn over, and we pull through everything. And we do that for each of the stitches. Yarn over, pop it into the stitch, yarn over, and then pull through everything. and you see I twist as I pull my yarn through just to give me a bit more space there. Then we turn, and we're now ready. I should have said at the beginning we do this with the right side facing us. We chain one, and then we're going to work into the back loops of these stitches, and we're going to work a single crochet here. And then we're going to be joining with a slip stitch to the side of the next two. So each of these double crochets counts as 2 stitches because they're 2 stitches high. So when you're slip stitching, just bear that in mind. And then we're ready to turn, and we're going to work our yarn over slip stitches in the back loops. And that's all we need to do. You just work your way around, joining as you go. Just go all the way around the front and then to the back, and you will meet back here, and then you can join this together with a little slip stitch seam. Another option for the bottom of your hoodie is to work a yarn over slip stitch really simply around the edge, and it gives a lovely texture. So we join to that double crochet at one of the sides, we chain one, and then you're going to yarn over slip stitch into that stitch, and then you're going to work 2 yarn over slip stitches per double crochet that we have here. So for each of the ends of the rows, they get 2 yarn over slip stitches. So we have 1 and 2 for that first one, and then our next stitch is here, and we get 1 and 2. I apologize if you can hear that fly buzzing around. I cannot get it out. And then you carry on going all the way around, as simply as that. When you get to your chain 2 in the middle, you work a yarn over slip stitch in each of those, so 1 and 2, and then you just carry on all the way around until you get to the beginning again. And then when you do, you slip stitch into this first stitch to join. Now you can carry on and work as many rounds of this as you like, but just be aware that it does add to the density and add to the weight of the garment. So it's just meant to be a lightweight edging just to finish off and frame the whole thing. Next, it is time to add the hood to our hoodie. And the way that we do this is that we work upwards from this neckline here to create a flat section, and then we're going to decrease and taper in at the top, and then that will join to magically create a hood shape. So to begin, we need to find the wrong side of the stitches of this first round that we have. So for me, that's going to be here, and we're going to join to this first stitch that we have here of the neckline. So this will match the numbers that you have for your first round here, and we're going to work a stacked double crochet in that first stitch. Move that so you can see better. So a stacked double crochet in that first stitch, then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and then in this chain 1 space we're going to work a granny cluster in there. And then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip this next granny cluster, and then granny cluster in the next chain 1 space. And then you're going to repeat that across to the last chain 1 space. All the way, you work all the way around this neckline and repeat that until this last chain 1 space that we have here. So once you're at that last chain 1 space, we've put a granny cluster in it, and then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and then in the last stitch we are going to work just a double crochet there. And then you're ready to turn. So to begin row 2, we are going to put a granny cluster in this first stitch that we have here, this double crochet, and we're going to then work a stacked double crochet and 2 double crochet all into that same stitch that we have there. Then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip this granny cluster, the 3 stitches there, and then work into that chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip your granny cluster, and then work into the next chain 1 here. And we're going to repeat that across and end with 3 double crochet in the last stitch. Here we are at the last granny cluster then, and I've chained 1. I'm going to skip this granny cluster, and then in this very last stitch I will work 3 double crochet to make my last granny cluster. Now these 2 rows form the repeat for the straight section of the hood, because this will then make this go up in a straight line, because for the next row we will repeat what we did on row 1, which is just work a double crochet here in that first stitch, and then we don't chain 1, we're going to skip the next 2 stitches and then start working straight into this chain 1 space here. So that will keep us a nice straight edge there at the front of the hood, but then you carry on working your granny stitch all the way around, all the way along the row rather. So repeat rows 1 and 2 for as many times as it tells you in the pattern, or as many times as you would like to get it to the height you would like it to be before we start to decrease. So after this section we then have a few decrease rows that will then only be for half of the hood, and then that will end up shaping it at the back for you. So work away for as many of these rows as you need to do, and then meet me back here and we'll do the decreasing together. Once you have worked the straight rows that you need for your hood, what we need to now do is create a space in the middle that's at an angle, and that we then seam. It will help then decrease and shape the top of the hood for us. And this is done in different amounts of rows for the different sizes, but the principle is exactly the same. I know I keep saying that, but it honestly is. So what I've done here is that I've put a stitch marker here in the center chain 1 space of our row here, and in the written pattern you'll have all the numbers there for all of the sizes, but basically it's the center chain 1 space, because what we're going to do is the next row, which is the first side decrease section, we are going to begin by working as we have before. So this side ends up staying straight with a stacked stitch there, and then working straight into that first chain 1 space we work a granny cluster there. And then as we have been doing, we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip this granny cluster and then work into, whoops, pardon me, the first chain 1 space that we come to there. And now we keep repeating that up until we get to this chain 1 space. So the chain 1 space before this stitch marker that we have here, because we're going to do something slightly different over these last chain spaces there. Here we are at those last 2 chain spaces then, and what we're going to do is do a decrease on those, just as we did and will do on the sleeves. So we're going to begin by working a double crochet in that chain 1 space, and then we're going to double crochet 2 together in this chain 1 space and then in this next one, the one that has the stitch marker in it. And then we complete that cluster by working then another double crochet. So that has decreased and it's going to start slanting at that angle for us. So now we need to turn to work row 2, because we're only working half of the hood now, and we'll come back and we'll work the other half in just a moment. Now row 2 should be nice and familiar. We're going to begin by working a stacked double crochet in that first stitch there, then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches and then go straight into that chain 1 space and work a granny cluster into there, and then the rest of the row matches what we have been doing before. We're going to work granny clusters into each of the chain 1 spaces, and then we'll work a granny cluster in the very last double crochet of the row as well. Now row 3 is almost the same as row 1, except that we are going to do our decrease over the last chain 1 space and the last stitch, because we have a double crochet as the last stitch of that row. So if you want to work away with your stacked double crochet here at the beginning and then your granny clusters, and meet me back here and I'll show you what we do. Here we are then, this is the last chain 1 space, so we're going to begin our granny cluster in there. But on our second stitch we're going to work a decrease over this chain space and then the last stitch of the row, and then finish off with a double crochet in that last stitch too, and that will carry on decreasing for us there. Now rows 2 and 3 then that we've just worked form the repeat for this decrease section, and you just need to keep repeating those for the amount of times that it tells you in the written pattern. It's different for different sizes. And then when you've done that, you can break your yarn and then come back to me and I'll show you how we do the other side. Now we finished that first decrease side of the hood, we're ready to begin the second one. And the key with this is that we now need to join and begin in the center. So where that stitch marker is that we put in at the very beginning of this row, we now need to join in there, and just double check that your stitches are facing. So we've got the back of the stitches facing us as we go along to the end now. And we are just going to essentially work a mirror image of what we did for this side. So we begin with a decrease because we now want to slant the other way. So over the chain one space that we're joined to currently, which we have already worked into, we work both sides of the hood decrease section into this chain one space, and into the next chain one space we're going to decrease over there. So we're going to begin with a stacked double crochet, and then we do our decrease stitch over this chain one space and then over the next one, and then we work our final double crochet off that granny cluster, and that has decreased for us. And then we chain one and then we carry on as we would normally, working our granny clusters. And then at the end you're going to match what we have been doing previously to keep the front of the hood straight. It's very hard to think of words while I'm crocheting. I don't know why I find it so challenging. But here we are. We're going to finish, because we've got our granny cluster at the end of this row, we're going to finish with a double crochet in the last stitch here. Now here we are, and we're going to just work a double crochet in that last stitch there. Then we're ready to turn. And again, we're going to work the mirror image of what we did before. So this end begins as usual. We're going to work a stacked double crochet and then 2 double crochet in that first stitch to make our first granny cluster. Then we chain one and off we go up until we get to the last chain one space. So there's our granny cluster in that last chain one space, and then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches of, or the 2 stitches of the granny cluster, and then in the last stitch of the row we are going to put a double crochet, and that completes that row for us. And we're ready to turn, and row 2 is going to decrease in the same way as we started, by working a decrease cluster over this first stitch here and then into that first chain space there. So we work a stacked double crochet, and then we begin our decrease stitch here, and then we work the rest of it into that chain one space, and then a double crochet into that chain one space as well, and that has decreased for us. Then we chain one and we work the rest of the row as we would normally. And so now you can see we know everything we need to know to keep decreasing to match the first side that we did. So keep working these decrease rows to match our decrease from here. And then when you finish that, break your yarn, and then we'll be ready to seam the hood together. Now I've finished decreasing on that other side as well, and I'm going to cut myself a really long tail because I'm facing in the right direction. Depending on the size that you're making, you may or may not be facing in the right direction to seam the hood together. But I am, so happy days. I'm going to show you how it sits first. We are going to seam, I have my long end here, and I'm going to seam all the way along here and then down here, and that will close the hood for me. So just go stitch for stitch, working your preferred seaming method here. The last thing I want to add to this hood is just a really simple edging all the way around the neckline here and around the hood. Now the best place I think to start this is going to be at the middle center of the hood here. And so I'm just going to put my hook in there, grab my yarn, and start us off with a chain 1 just to get going. And then we have the sides of the stitches now as we work along here, and each of these stitches is going to get 2 stitches in them because these are the height of a double crochet, so I'm going to put 2 stitches in them. And so in the first stitch here I'm going to do a yarn over slip stitch. So we yarn over, put into where we want it to be, yarn over and pull through, and then pull through everything. So then into the next part of that double crochet we're going to yarn over, work into the side of that double crochet, yarn over and pull through everything. Now you see I twist as I do my yarn over slip stitches, and that's the way I found, because if you try and do it from the front here there's just not enough space and they end up being really tight. So if you turn and slip through in that direction they're much easier to do. So the side of this stitch gets 2, and then we come to the next one that also gets 2. And that's just as simple as it's going to be, because it's then going to give us a lovely little edge that's going to be visible whether you have your hood up or your hood down there. And so you're going to carry on doing that, working all the way around the edge of the hood, she says. It's very hard to get this all on camera now. There we go, and you're going to see there's sides of stitches that do then change direction, because remember we added the hood going in that direction but the top works down in this direction. So work away until we get to the center point of the neckline, and then I'll show you what we do here. Here I am at the center of the neckline, and I've worked into the stitch that comes to it, and then remember we did that V, didn't we, with the 2 granny clusters in it across that chain 2 space. And you can do this however you would like it to be. If you add more stitches than I do, then your neckline will be wider here at this point, but I want to cinch mine in a little, so I'm just going to go in between those 2 granny clusters and work a yarn over slip stitch in between them, and then I'm ready to skip that next one there and then start working into the side of the next double crochet that we come to along the neckline. So that one then gets 2 yarn over slip stitches in it, and then we carry on all the way up and around to back where we began. Here we are back at the beginning, and so all we need to do now is slip stitch into that first stitch to join, then break your yarn and you're ready to weave in your ends there. Whether you are following the pattern for the hoodie, the cardigan or the sweater here, we are going to make the sleeves for all of them in exactly the same way. So even though I'm working here on the hoodie version, this will apply to the cardigan and the sweater as well. And so what we need to do is we have created our armhole, haven't we? And that will be a different size depending on which size you are making. So you'll have a different underarm seam. Yours will look different to this, and please don't worry about that unless you are making the same medium that I am here. But the principle again is exactly the same. So we are going to find the chain 1 space that is nearest the armhole but that doesn't have anything joined to it. So this one has something joined to it, but this next one doesn't. So this is the one that we're going to join to, because what we're going to do is we're going to work granny clusters all the way around until we get to the underarm, and then we do something a bit different. Now in the written pattern you'll need to find the size that you're making, because round 1 for each of them is written out individually and it's very different to make sure that we get the right amount of granny clusters in this armhole space. But the principles are the same. We're going to start with working a stacked double crochet here, and then 2 more double crochet to make our first granny cluster. Then we're going to chain 1, we'll skip the next granny cluster, and then 3 double crochet in the next. We chain 1, we skip, and then we work around, and we're going to work these granny clusters into each of them up to the last empty chain 1 space of this armhole. So there we are, I'm in that last chain 1 space before the armhole, and now my instructions for my size say 3 double crochet into the chain 1 space joined for armhole. So that's in this one here, and this is where you really need to check because it might be different for your size there. And then we're going to chain 1 And now we're going to start working in this underarm extension, which we have working along here. And we need to do 3 double crochet in the first chain of the underarm extension. So that's here where another granny cluster, you remember, went in the opposite direction when we were closing underneath the sleeves or underneath the armholes. Then we chain 1, we skip the next 2, which are the 2 chains that we skipped there. And then we're going to work 3 double crochet in the next chain there. Then we're going to chain 1, then we're just going to skip 3, so that's 1, 2 and 3, and then we work 3 double crochet in the next, which happens to be the last chain of the underarm extension for this size. Then we chain 1 and then we do 3 double crochet in the space where the armhole joins, so that's a chain 1 space that has already got a granny cluster in it, but we add another one to it because then that is for our sleeve. And so then we chain 1 and then we skip this granny cluster, and then we're going to slip stitch in this first to join. And now for the sleeves, just like we did for the bodies, we're actually going to turn. So we work in turned rounds for these sleeves. Once you have done that first setup round, so round 1 of your sleeves, and made sure that you've got the right amount of granny clusters for the size that you're making, you can work, as it tells you in the written pattern, your sleeves in any way that you would like. The things that we need to know is how to do a straight round, so to keep the count the same, and how to do a decrease round. And in the pattern it does suggest how to do a full length sleeve and where to start decreasing on each of the different sizes. But I think the best thing to do at this point is just to try it on yourself and decide where you would like your decreases to be. And indeed you don't have to do decreases at all if you don't want to. One of my versions I think I might keep with a completely straight sleeve and no cuff on at all for a really nice light summery look. But then you can taper it down if you want to as well. It's really lovely and versatile. So let's look at how to do a straight round first of all. So we have turned, and now we're going to work a stacked double crochet and then 2 double crochet in that chain 1 space. Then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip this granny cluster, and then we're going to work 3 double crochet a granny cluster into that next chain 1 space. And that is all you're going to do all the way around, working these granny clusters separated by a chain 1. And then when you get back to your first stitch, you're going to slip stitch to join, and then you're going to turn, and then you'll be back into that chain 1 space all ready to start your next round. If you would like to decrease at any point in your sleeves and taper them in, then we need to work a decrease round, and that begins with a stacked double crochet. And then what we're going to be doing is decreasing and making this chain 1 space and this chain 1 space into just one set. So we're going to get rid of 1 granny cluster per decrease round. And so we're going to yarn over, and we're going to work a double crochet 2 together over this chain 1 space. So begin it here, and then you're going to end it in this one here. So you're going to then go over there, yarn over, and then pull through all 3. So that is a double crochet 2 together that straddles these 2 chain 1 spaces. And then we finish this new granny cluster with a double crochet there. So we have 3 stitches, and that now counts as a granny cluster, but it's over 2 chain 1 spaces. And then we chain 1, and then we work regular granny clusters into the rest of the chain 1 spaces around your sleeve. So chain 1, skip the next, and off we go. So that's all there is to it for a decrease. You just do a decrease cluster at the beginning of the round, and then when you get back to here, you're going to slip stitch into this one, and you'll find then that you've got 1 less chain space and 1 less granny cluster than you had on the round before. So work your sleeves as you would like them, and then be mindful at the end, if you would like to add a cuff or a little piece of ribbing, then meet me back here and I'll show you a couple of options for those. Once your sleeves are the length that you'd like them to be, we have some options for the sleeve cuff here. Now, option 1 is to do nothing, just leave it as it is. They're really on trend at the moment, sort of slightly wider sleeves without any cuffs at all. Option 2 is to do a join as you go, row by row sleeve cuff. Option 3 is what I've done on the base of this version here, is some yarn over slip stitches in the round. So I think that's what I'm going to end up doing on here, but I'll quickly show you the row join as you go rows. So if you're using the same colour, then obviously you can carry on with the yarn as you finish your last round of your sleeve. But we just join to any position. I'm doing this just to show you, but I would generally join underneath where your sleeve is going to be, so it's underneath your arm. And what we're going to do is chain out as many as you would like to end up the length of the cuff that you would like it to be. And then we're going to work single crochets into the back bump of each of those chains up until you meet up again with your last round. Then when we get to the end of that, we are going to, this very first time, just slip stitch in one stitch here. And then we're going to turn just this cuff, and then we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch into the back loop only. So turn over there, yarn over and pull through everything. Yarn over to begin, pop through your stitch, yarn over and pull through everything. So we work those until the end of this row now. And then we turn. Then we chain one, and then we're going to single crochet in the back loop only. Now if you want a slightly tighter cuff, then you can do yarn over slip stitches for both of these rows, the front and not the front and the back, sorry, so the right side and the wrong side. And then you can then slip stitch into the next two. So it's only the first time we do it that we slip stitch into one. So we slip stitch into two there, and then you're ready to turn and work your yarn over slip stitches in the back loop only. And so you just carry on doing that all the way around the edge of your sleeve. And then when you get back to here at the beginning, you're going to join with a slip stitch seam to the beginning. The other option, and the one I'm going to go for this one, I think, is to do a yarn over slip stitch in the round. So I'm going to chain one to begin, and then I'm going to yarn over, pop through that stitch, yarn over and pull through everything. And you're just going to work one of those for each of the stitches and the chains that you have around. Now, if you want your sleeves to be slightly tighter, then you could just not do it in the, sorry, not your sleeves to be tighter, your cuffs to be tighter, not do a stitch in any of these chains that you come across. But I would like mine to be nice and level and keep the size that they are. So that is all there is to it, and you can work as many rounds of this as you like, as I say, but do be mindful that it does add a fair bit of bulk and weight to the end of your sleeve, which can be a really good thing. It can be a really, really good thing, but just try on as you go and figure out how long you would like yours to be. It's just meant to be a little nod to detailing at the end of your cuff there. So make your cuffs however you would like them to be, and then we're almost done. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you've enjoyed making this hoodie together, or dress, or whatever version you've decided yours will be. I can't wait to see your version, so come and find me. I'm Hand Jan Crochet all over social media where you'd expect me to be, and I will see you again soon.